My name is Elias. I was born in the glass and steel canyons of Manhattan, where the only stars I ever saw were the ones on Broadway marquees, and the only soil I touched was the potted ficus in my mother's Upper West Side apartment. The subway was my bloodstream. The honk of taxis my lullaby. Nature, to me, was Central Park on a good day or a rented cabin in the Catskills when my parents felt guilty about my screen time. So when Professor Delgado dropped the bomb of our senior capstone, an immersive profile requiring us to live inside a world that would spit in the face of everything we knew, I laughed along with the class. Then I signed up for the one option that made everyone else go quiet. 3 weeks aboard the Celestial Drift, a working cargo schooner that hauled timber and dry goods between the remote islands of the Alaskan Inside Passage. No engines. No Wi-Fi. Just wind, salt, and whatever the North Pacific decided to throw at you. My classmates chose Urban Falconers, Trappist Monastery in Kentucky, a drag collective in New Orleans. I emailed Captain Ruth Halvorsen, a woman whose voice on the satellite phone sounded like driftwood rubbed smooth by decades of tide. She agreed to take me on, amused, she said, by the idea of a landlocked typewriter jockey learning how to keep a 110-foot, gefrigged schooner from foundering in a following sea. The float plane dropped me on a cedar plank dock in Pelican, population 112 in a good year. The drift lay alongside like a patient animal, her black hull scarred by ice and barnacles, her four masts raking the low gray sky. I stepped aboard with a duffel full of brand-new foul-weather gear that still smelled of plastic and optimism. The deck tilted under my city sneakers. The air tasted of diesel kelp, and something metallic I would later learn was fear. A figure emerged from the forecastle hatch. He moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had never wasted motion in his life. Tall but not showy, so 6'1". Maybe his shoulders filled a hand-knitted gansey the color of storm clouds. Sun-bleached hair stuck out beneath a watch cap pulled low, and a week's worth of gold-brown beard framed a mouth that looked accustomed to silence. His oilskin trousers were patched at the knees, and his boots, well, they had started life as black rubber and were now mostly barnacle and tar. He couldn't have been more than 28, 5 years ahead of my 23. But the way he carried the weight of the deck under his bare feet told me he'd already rounded Cape Horn in his own head a dozen times. "You the scribe?" he asked. The voice was low, salted, the faint Scandinavian lilt that curled around the consonants like rope. "Elias Cohen," he said, offering a hand that suddenly felt soft as printer paper. "Columbia J School." He wiped his palm on a rag that might once have been red and clasped my hand. "Calluses like oak bark." "Jonas Halvorsen, mate." "Ruth's my aunt." His eyes pale green, the color of sea glass after a nor'wester gave me the same quick inventory my foul weather gear had already failed. A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, more an acknowledgement that we were about to share the same small universe for 21 days, and one of us was already seasick on dry land. "Captain said you'd be bunking forward with the crew," he continued. "Hope you like tight quarters and the smell of wet wool." I had pictured a writer's garret with a porthole and a desk. Instead, Jonas led me down a companionway so steep it was practically a ladder. The crew quarters were a narrow cabin lit by a single kerosene lamp swinging from a beam. 6 pipe berths, 3 aside, smelled of tarred marlin, coffee, and unwashed humanity. My assigned bunk was the lower port side, already claimed by a coil of manila line in someone's spare sou'wester. "It's cozy," I managed. Jonas snorted. "It's a boat. Cozy is when the bilge pump fails." He tossed my duffel onto the thin mattress. "Stow your gear, then up top. Supper's in 20. After that, we sail on the tide. Sleep while you can. The Gulf doesn't issue rain checks." Captain Ruth turned out to be a compact woman in her late 50s, built like a dock piling and twice as immovable. Her braid was iron gray, her eyes the same sea glass green as Jonas's, though hers had seen more winters. She greeted me with a handshake that rearranged my knuckles and a question, "You puke easy, kid?" "I once edited a food column," I said. "Does that count?" She barked a laugh that rattled the galley pans. "We'll find out." The crew totaled 7 souls, Ruth, Jonas, an ancient deckhand named Olaf, who spoke mostly in grunts, a cook called Marisol, who could turn salt cod into something bordering on religion, and 3 seasonal hands from Sitka who treated the schooner like a floating frat house until the wind came up hard. Supper was boiled potatoes, caribou stew, and hardtack that required commitment. I sat across from Jonas, who ate with the same unhurried precision he seemed to apply to everything. Conversation was sparse. The crew saved words for when they mattered. I tried a joke about Manhattan bagels. Silence, then Olaf's single grunt that might have been amusement or indigestion. After supper, Jonas showed me the ship. The Drift was 110 feet of Douglas fir and live oak. It's built in 1923 in Ballard and refitted more times than anyone could count. Her holds could swallow a small lumberyard. Her sails, when we set them, were acres of patched canvas that smelled of linseed oil and stubborn hope. Jonas spoke in short sentences, pointing out the pin rails, the fife rails. The monkey fist nodded to every line so your hands didn't slip when the deck pitched 40 degrees. Tomorrow, we load timber in Hoona, said. Then Juneau, then the open Gulf. Weather windows tight. You'll stand watch like the rest of us. 4 on, 4 off. You pull lines, you coil lines, you scrub decks. You write when you're off watch and not puking. I don't puke, I lied. He gave me that half smile again. Famous last words. We cast off at 0400. Lines singled up and slipped into black water that swallowed sound. I stood on the quarterdeck and borrowed oilskins 2 sizes too large, clutching a mug of coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. The sky was a low lid of cloud. The air tasted of snow that hadn't decided whether to fall. Jonas was at the helm, feet braced, one hand on the wheel, the other holding a tin of Copenhagen he never seemed to open. The sails went up in a choreography of shouted orders and creaking blocks. When the wind filled the mainsail, the whole ship leaned like a living thing and surged forward. My stomach lurched in protest. By noon, we were loaded with fresh-cut spruce. The deck a chaos of barking dogs' winches, not animals, and the smell of resin so thick you could chew it. I hauled on lines until my palms blistered, then kept hauling because Jonas was watching, and I refused to be the kid who quit on day 1. When the last log was lashed down, he handed me a pair of leather palms. Tape those blisters tonight. Salt water finds every cut. That night I stood my first watch, midnight to 4, with Marisol at the helm. The sea was glass under a half moon. Phosphorescence trailed the wake like green fire. I learned to read the compass by the glow of the binnacle, to feel the ship's mood and the way sheensward the rudder. Jonas relieved Marisol at 0400, wordless, and sent me below with a nod that felt like approval. Answered the rudder. Jonas relieved Marisol at 0400, wordless, and sent me below with a nod that felt like approval. The days blurred. We beat south through Chatham Strait, tacked across Icy Strait, under a sky the color of tarnished pewter. I learned to splice line, to box the compass, to tell a following sea from a beam reach by the way the ship groaned. I learned that all hands meant exactly that, and that coffee was a food group. My foul-weather gear acquired its own ecosystem of salt and fish scales. My hands toughened. My city pallor turned windburned and salt-flecked. Jonas was everywhere and nowhere. He could coil a line faster than I could untangle my thoughts, climb the ratlins in a gale without looking down, and still find time to brew coffee that didn't taste like battery acid. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. Once, when a preventer line parted and the boom swung wild, he caught it one-handed and muscled it back into place while the rest of us stared like tourists. Another night, off Point Adolphus, we watched humpbacks breach in the moonlight. He told me quiet, almost shit that his mother used to say. The whales carried the old sailors' stories in their songs. I wrote that down in the margin of my watch log, the ink smudged by spray. The bunk room became less alien. I learned to sleep through the snoring of deckhands and the slap of waves against the hull. My bunk acquired a small shelf, a battered copy of 2 Years Before the Mast, a tin of bag bomb for my hands, and a photograph I'd brought of my little sister waving from the ferry dock. Jonas noticed it one morning while I was lacing my boots. She'll miss you, he said. She thinks I'm insane. Family usually does. He paused. Mine thought the same when I signed on at 16. Said the sea would eat me. Been waiting 12 years for it to take a bite. I wanted to ask why he stayed. What kept a man tied to a life of wet wool and broken sleep? But the bell rang for breakfast, and the moment slipped away like water through a scupper. 10 days in, the weather turned. A low slid down from the Gulf, winds building to 40 knots, seas stacking up like brick walls. We shortened sail until we were down to a storm jib and a reef staysail, the ship plunging through green water that swept the decks ankle deep. I was on the wheel with Jonas when a rogue wave hit us broadside. The drift rolled until the lee rail buried, and for one endless second, I thought we were gone. Then she righted, shaking herself like a dog, and Jonas's hand clamped on my shoulder. Easy, he said, calm as Sunday. She's tougher than both of us. I puked over the rail at the end of that watch. Jonas handed me a tin cup of water without comment. Later in the galley, Marisol slid an extra portion of gingerbread across the table. For the landlubber who didn't fall overboard, she said. The crew cheered. I laughed until I cried, salt water and gingerbread mixing on my tongue. The storm blew itself out near Cape Spencer. We limped into Juneau under a sky scrubbed clean, the Chilcats white against blue. I stood on the bowsprit while we tied up, wind burning my cheeks, and realized I hadn't thought about Wi-Fi in a week. My notebook was full, sketches of Jonas's hands on the wheel. Olaf's grunt translated into 3 dialects of silence, the way the ship's bell sounded different at dawn than at dusk. I had enough for 10 articles, but the story I wanted to tell was smaller, sharper, the moment when a city boy learned that the world was wider than any skyline, and that some horizons were meant to be chased. Not framed on our last night, Ruth threw a dockside potluck, halibut baked in brown butter, salmon berries and cream. Sourdough that had started its life in 1898. The crew swapped lies about storms and near misses. Jonas sat on an upturned crate, carving a piece of driftwood with a knife that looked older than both of us. When the fire burned low, he handed me the carving, a tiny schooner sails-bellied, riding a wave no bigger than my thumbnail. For the article, he said, so you don't forget what she feels like under your feet. I turned it over in my blistered palms. I won't. He looked at me then, really looked. The way you look at a chart when you're trying to decide whether to run or heave to. You did all right, Elias Cohen. The sea didn't eat you. Disappointed? I asked. His smile was slow, real, the kind that started in the eyes and ended somewhere near the heart. Relieved, he said, some stories are better when the teller comes home to write them. The float plane lifted off at dawn, Juneau shrinking behind me until the mountains swallowed it whole. I pressed my forehead to the window and watched the celestial drift grow small. Her sails white against black water, Jonas a speck on the quarterdeck. My duffel was heavier with salt-stained clothes and the weight of a world I'd only borrowed. In my pocket, the little carved schooner rode the turbulence like it had been born to it. 3 weeks. I had come for a story and left with a different kind of knowing, that some lives are measured not in deadlines but in tides. That silence can be louder than any city. That sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is step off solid ground and trust the wind to carry them. The first thing I noticed about the ranch was the smell. Pine sap, horse sweat, and the faint iron temps of distant snow. It clung to everything, even the inside of my lungs. The second thing I noticed was Mara. She was leaning against the corral fence when the truck dropped me off. One boot heel hooked on the lowest rail. Arms folded like she'd been waiting for years and had decided to make a hobby of it. City boy, she said, not a question. Her voice carried the same low register the wind used when it slid between the mountains. I had a duffel in one hand and a half-finished journalism degree in the other. Alex, I offered. She didn't take the handshake. Just pushed off the fence and started walking. I followed because the alternative was standing there like a scarecrow with no field. The bunkhouse was a long, low building that smelled of coffee, boot leather, and men who hadn't seen a mirror in days. My cot was the one under the window that didn't close all the way. At 4:17 a.m. the first morning, the door opened without a knock. Mara stood in the rectangle of gray light, steam curling from the tin mug in her hand. Coffee's hot. You're with me. I learned later that with me was ranch shorthand for asterisk sink or swim. And I'm not throwing you a rope unless you ask twice. Asterisk breakfast was eggs. Scrambled with last night's chili and biscuits hard enough to crack a tooth. Mara ate, standing up, one hip against the counter. Eyes on the window where the sky was still deciding whether to be night or morning. She introduced me to Sage, a bay mare with a white blaze and the patient expression of someone who'd seen every kind of fool. I'd logged for hours of riding lessons in a Chicago suburb. Sage knew it the second I swung up. She sighed through her nose like a disappointed ant. We rode out under a sky the color of tarnished pewter. The land rolled away in every direction, rumpled and endless, stitched together by barbed wire and the occasional cottonwood leaning into the wind. Mara pointed out breaks in the fence the way other people point out constellations. See that sag? Coyote's been testing it. Fix it before he brings friends. My hands were city soft. The wire cutters felt like surgical instruments. By noon, I had blisters and a new respect for the word tension. Mara never raised her voice, never hurried. She simply did the thing, twisted, snipped, and expected me to watch once, then do it twice as well. When I managed a decent repair without slicing my thumb off, she gave a single nod. It felt like being knighted, the days blurred. I learned to read cattle the way sailors read waves, the flick of an ear, the angle of a hip, the sudden stillness that meant trouble. My shoulders mapped new topography of ache. I fell asleep with the taste of dust in my mouth and woke with it still there. Mara was everywhere and nowhere. She could gentle a colt with 2 fingers on its neck or wrestle a grown steer to the ground without seeming to try. She spoke to the horses in Spanish, low and rolling, and they leaned into the sound like it was sunlight. She always made sure the hands ate before she did, sliding the last biscuit onto someone else's plate while pretending to. Be fascinated by the coffee pot, I started inventing reasons to ride beside her. Asterisk, need to check the north pasture. I thought I saw a limp in that heifer. Winds shifting, might need another set of eyes. Asterisk, she never called me on it. Just swung up into the saddle and waited for me to catch up. Calving season arrived like a train with no brakes. The barn became a cathedral of lowing and steam and the copper smell of birth. I pulled my first night shift with Mara the same week a nor'easter decided to bury the world in white. We trudged through drifts to our waists, lanterns swinging wild circles of gold. Inside, the barn was a pocket of warmth, thick with the scent of hay and amniotic fluid. Mara checked each cow with the same calm thoroughness she brought to everything else. Red heifer in the back, she said. She's close. Watch her tail. I watched. I learned. When the heifer finally lay down and started pushing, Mara talked me through it like we were assembling furniture. Hands here. Feel for shoulders. Easy, don't force. The calf slid out, slick and shining, legs folded like a secret. Mara cleared its mouth, rubbed its ribs until it coughed and bleated. I was shaken at from cold, but from the sudden, brutal intimacy of it. Life raw and squalling, right there in the straw. Mara looked up. Her face was streaked with sweat and someone else's blood. You didn't flinch. Almost did. Almost doesn't count. She handed me the towel. Dry him off. Later, when the storm had spent itself and the sky peeled open to a color I had no name for, we stood in the doorway. Snow hissed off the roof in soft avalanches. Our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. You're not what I figured, she said. What did you figure? Someone who'd count the days till the bus came. I laughed, a sound that surprised us both. I lost track around day 4. She studied me for a long moment. Snowflakes caught in her lashes and melted. Good, she said, and went back inside. The next storm was worse. Benjamin sent us out together again, 2 sets of eyes, he said, though we both knew the real reason. The barn felt smaller, with just the 2 of us. The air thick with warmth and the low thunder of laboring cows. We worked through the night. A breech calf that took both of us and every trick Mara knew. A first-time heifer who panicked and tried to climb the stall wall. By 3 a.m., we had 4 new calves, and a rhythm that felt older than words, her hands. My hands, the slick give of life between us. At some point, the lanterns burned low. We sat on overturned buckets, sharing the last of the coffee. The storm had quieted to a steady whisper against the roof. Mara leaned her head back against the wall. "You ever think about staying?" The question hung in the dim light like a soap bubble beautiful. It's impossible, ready to pop. I think about it every time I fix a fence without cursing. I said. She smiled, small and crooked. That's a start. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing every track we'd made. Inside, something was being written in a language neither of us had spoken yet. Spring came sudden and rude, like a drunk uncle at a wedding. The snow melted into rivers that carved new paths through the pastures. Calves learned to run before they learned to walk straight. I learned to throw a loop that actually caught something on the first try. One afternoon, Mara found me in the tack room, wrestling with a bridle that had more knots than leather. She took it from my hands without asking, fingers moving sure and quick. "City boys getting calluses," she said, not looking up. "City boys getting ideas." She glanced at me then. The light through the window caught the gold flecks in her eyes. "Ideas are dangerous out here. Some are worth the risk." For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of leather and the distant bawl of a calf looking for its mother. Then Mara handed me the bridle, her fingers brushing mine. "North pasture needs checking," she said. "Ride with me." I swung up behind her on Sage. There was only one saddle between us, and neither of us suggested walking. The mare didn't complain. We rode out under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The wind carrying the smell of sagebrush and new grass. Halfway to the fence line, Mara reined in. The land stretched away in every direction, empty and full at the same time. She turned in the saddle to face me. "Still counting days?" I shook my head. "Stop somewhere between the third calf and the first time you smiled at me." She leaned in, slow enough that I could have moved away. I didn't. Her mouth tasted like coffee and wintergreen and something I couldn't name. When we pulled apart, the world looked sharper, like someone had adjusted the focus. "Welcome to the ranch, Alex," she said. I laughed against her shoulder. "Took you long enough. We fixed the fence in half the time it would have taken alone." On the ride back, I didn't bother inventing excuses. I just stayed close, matching Sage's stride, letting the rhythm of hoofbeats say what neither of us needed to. That night, the bunkhouse was quiet. Most of the hands were asleep, worn out from branding. I lay awake listening to the wind move through the cottonwoods, thinking about how far I was from the life I'd planned. The door opened soft as a secret. Mara slipped inside, boots in one hand. She didn't speak, just crossed the room and sat on the edge of my cot. Moonlight striped her face through the half-open window. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Me neither." She traced the callus on my palm with her thumb. "These are honest hands now. Still learning. Some things you don't learn alone." Inside, we learned the shape of each other in the dark slow. It's deliberate, like mending a fence that would hold for years. Morning came early, as always. Mara was gone before the first rooster, leaving only the faint scent of hay and the indentation on the pillow where her head had been. I swung my legs over the side of the cot and smiled at the ache in muscles I hadn't known. I owned the coffee was already brewing. I poured 2 cups and carried them outside. Mara was leaning against the corral, watching the sun come up over the mountains. She took the cup without looking, our fingers brushing in the old, familiar way. "North pasture again today?" I asked. She sipped, eyes on the horizon. "Figured we'd check the whole loop. Make sure nothing's broken." I nodded. Some things were worth checking twice. We rode out together, side by side, the land opening up before us like a story still being written. Behind us, the ranch woke up slow and sure. Ahead, the day stretched wide and unclaimed. I didn't count the days anymore. I counted the fences we fixed, the calves we pulled, the quiet mornings when the coffee was H. I didn't count the days anymore. I counted the fences we fixed, the calves we pulled, the quiet mornings when the coffee was hot and her shoulder brushed mine. Out here, that was enough. The wind off the North Sea came in cold. It slaps against the stone walls of the old croft, rattling the single-pane windows like it wanted in. Inside the lambing shed, the air was thick with lanolin, iodine, and the coppery smell of new blood. Rain hammered the corrugated roof and sheets, and every gust sent a fine mist through the gaps in the boards. I held the lantern high while Ewan crouched beside a way that had been straining for hours, her sides heaving like bellows. "Feet first," he muttered, sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms slick. But the head's turned back. "We'll need to go in." I passed him the obstetrical gel without being asked. 6 weeks earlier, I'd have gagged at the sight. Now my hands were steady. Ewan's voice stayed low, the same calm he used on skittish horses. "Cup the nose. Keep the tongue forward. There you go, Jamie. Easy now." The lamb slid free in a rush of fluid and membrane, legs bicycling the air. Ewan cleared the mouth, rubbed the chest with a fistful of straw. A cough, a sneeze, then the first indignant bleat. The Awe lurched up, nosing her baby with frantic tenderness. Ewan sat back on his heels, wiped his brow with the back of her wrist. "Good hands," he said. Not praise exactly, more like confirmation I hadn't known I was waiting for. Outside, the storm eased to a steady hiss. Dawn leaked gray across the Macaire, turning the Atlantic the color of pewter. We delivered 5 lambs that night, twins twice over. My boots were soaked through, my shoulders aching. But something inside me felt lighter than it had in years. Ewan leaned against the shed door, rolling a cigarette with one hand. "Cruel, be here soon. Coffee's gone cold." I joined him, close enough that the heat of him cut the chill. He smelled of sheep and wet wool and something indefinably his own. "You thought I'd be useless," I said. He lit the cigarette, cupped the flame against the wind. "Thought you'd be gone by now?" Edinburgh boy with a deadline and a train ticket. "Still got the ticket," I admitted. But the story changed. He exhaled smoke toward the sky, eyes on the horizon. Stories do that. The moment stretched, fragile as the newborn lambs. Then the Land Rover crunched up the track, headlights cutting through the drizzle. We stepped apart. That night the weather turned again. Sleet hissed against the byre windows while Ewan and I bedded down in the corner with a storm lantern and a flask of tea strong enough to stand a spoon. "The old shepherd, Callum, had sent us both 2 sets of eyes," he said. Though everyone knew the real reason was to keep the city lad from freezing in his sleeping bag. Ewan checked the pens one last time, moving quiet among the ewes. When he came back, he dropped onto the straw bale beside me, close enough that our knees touched. "Quiet for now," he said. "Storm's keeping them settled." I nodded, throat tight. The space between us felt charged, like the air before lightning. He turned the lantern wick down until the glow was just enough to see the planes of his face. "I'm not good at this," he said. "Words. But I'm good at knowing when something's worth the risk." My pulse hammered so hard I was sure he heard it. "And is it?" His answer was to lean in, slow enough that I could have moved away. I didn't. The kiss tasted of tea and salt and peat smoke. Careful at first, then not careful at all, when we broke apart. The lantern flame danced in his eyes. "Been worth it since the first night you didn't flinch at a prolapse," he said. I laughed, shaky. Romance on the hoof, the days blurred. Dawn chores, feeding, tagging lambs, repairing fences whipped by gales. The island was small, 30 souls in winter, half that in a storm, but it felt vast under the sky. Ewan taught me to read the weather in the clouds banking over Barra, to hear the difference between a way about 2 lamb and one just restless. I taught him how to frame a photograph so the light caught the wet wool like silver filigree. We were careful. Callum's wife Morag had eyes sharp as a gannet's, and the bothy walls were thin. But after the others turned in, we'd slip away sometimes, just to the cliff edge, to watch the phosphorescence in the surf. Sometimes to the old Black House ruin, where the roof had fallen in decades ago. There, under starlight, sharp as broken glass. We learned each other by touch and whisper. On my last evening, Morag served a farewell supper of Cullen skink and oatcakes. Ewan sat across the table, expression neutral, but his boot found my ankle under the cloth and stayed there. When the dishes were done, he murmured, "Meet me at the shieling. Bring the good whiskey." The shieling was a stone hut half swallowed by heather, used for summer grazing before the war. Inside, the air smelled of earth and old smoke. Ewan had spread sheepskins on the floor and hung a Tilly lamp from a roof beam. He poured 2 drams into enamel mugs. "To your article," he said, clinking his against mine. "May it do the island justice." And to the man who showed me its bones, I answered. We drank. The silence that followed was easy, full of the wind combing the macaire outside. I tried to memorize him the way the lamplight caught the red in his beard, small scar through his left eyebrow from a ram's horn years ago. He set his mug down and crossed to the far wall. Found this when I was 12, hiding from chores. He brushed moss from a stone, revealing letters carved deep. AM plus DR inside a crooked heart. Below, a date the 14th of April 1915, I traced the grooves. First World War. Alastair MacNeil owned this shieling then. Donald Ross was his gilly. They went over together in 16. Donald never came back. Alasdair sold the croft in 19 and moved to Glasgow. Never married. The weight of it settled between us, 2 men marking something the world would have burned them for. I thought of trench mud and mustard gas, of telegrams delivered to croft doors. They'd had weeks, maybe days, and still they'd carved their names into stone. Ewan's voice was soft. "Wanted you to see it before you left? Proof it's been done before. Proof it can last." I turned to him. "I'm coming back, Ewan. After the piece is filed. After finals. I'll find work for Lance. Maybe the local paper in Stornoway. I can write from anywhere." He studied me a long moment, then pulled me close. "Island's not going anywhere. Neither am I." We made love on the sheepskins, slow and deliberate, as if we could press the moment into the stone itself. Afterward we lay tangled, watching the lamp burn low. "There's ferries," he murmured against my hair. "And planes now, small ones. We'll manage the miles." Morning came too soon. I shouldered my rucksack while gulls wheeled overhead. Ewan walked me to the pier, hands in pockets, wind tugging his hair. The ferry horn sounded low and mournful. "Call when you land," he said. I offered my hand public safe. He took it, thumb brushing my knuckles once hidden in the handshake. "See you soon. Jamie from Edinburgh. See you soon, Ewan MacLeod." As the boat pulled away, I watched him shrink against the quay, plaid shirt bright against the gray. He raised one hand. I raised mine until the island was only a smudge on the horizon. I had come for a story about crofting in the digital age. What I carried home was older thin Wi-Fi, carved in stone and sheepskin, and the salt wind off the Minch, not an ending. A beginning, stubborn as heather, enduring as the tide.